The rescue on the freeway. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden hue over the endless stretch of freeway as cars sped past in both directions. The sounds of engines roaring and horns blaring filled the air, creating a chaotic symphony of city life. Amidst it all, a lone dog sat trembling on the concrete median, dangerously close to oncoming traffic. It was a golden retriever, but its once lustrous fur was matted and coated with dirt. Deep scratches and scars lined its frail body, and one of its hind legs looked injured. The dog's eyes were filled with fear, darting left and right, as if it had nowhere to go. Drivers saw him. Some slowed down for a second, sympathetic but helpless, while others honked impatiently, urging the dog to move, not realizing it had no way out. Then, a silver sedan came to a sudden stop. Inside the car, Jenna Carter gripped the steering wheel, her heart pounding. She was late for an appointment, but the moment she saw the dog, all other concerns vanished. She had always been an animal lover, and the sight of this terrified, injured retriever sitting alone in the middle of the freeway was something she couldn't ignore. "Oh no," she whispered to herself. The cars behind her honked aggressively, but she didn't care. Taking a deep breath, she threw on her hazard lights, pushed open her door, and stepped onto the concrete island. A race against time. The dog flinched as Jenna approached, its ears pinned back in fear and confusion. It had likely been dodging cars for hours, surviving by instinct alone. "Hey, buddy," Jenna said softly, crouching down just a few feet away. She didn't reach for it. She knew better than to scare a traumatized dog further. Instead, she slowly extended her hand, palm open, letting the retriever sniff at his own pace. But the dog didn't move. It just stared at her, as if debating whether to trust this strange human who had suddenly appeared amidst the chaos. Jenna heard more honking, and her pulse quickened. The rush-hour traffic was only getting worse, and it was only a matter of time before someone either lost patience or the dog panicked and bolted into traffic. She slowly reached into her car, grabbing the protein bar she always kept in the glove compartment. She unwrapped it and held out a small piece. "Come on, buddy, you're okay now." The dog sniffed the air. His body remained tense, but the hunger won over the fear, and he inched forward just enough to take a bite. Jenna didn't move. Another piece. Another hesitant bite. Then, carefully, she reached forward and gently placed a hand on his side. The dog flinched, but didn't pull away. Progress. A sigh of relief escaped her lips. "Okay, buddy, let's get you out of here." Slowly, carefully, she looped her scarf around his neck, forming a makeshift leash. When she gently tugged, the retriever hesitated but then took an uncertain step forward. Jenna coaxed him closer, guiding him toward the passenger seat of her car. Just as she was about to lift him in, a loud truck horn blasted behind them. The retriever yelped, jerking away in panic. Jenna lunged, throwing her arms around the dog just as he tried to dart into traffic. "No," she gasped, holding onto him tightly. For a few terrifying seconds, the world around them blurred. Horns, shouting, the smell of exhaust. Until finally, the dog stilled in her arms, his body shaking. Jenna didn't realize she was shaking too. Taking another breath, she finally lifted him into the passenger seat, closed the door, and collapsed against her car for a moment. Her hands were still trembling as she slid into the driver's seat. She glanced at the retriever, curled up on the seat, watching her with tired, weary eyes. "You're safe now, buddy," she whispered. She had no idea how true those words would turn out to be. With one last look at the highway where he could have died, she put the car in drive and headed toward the nearest vet clinic. An unbelievable discovery. 20 minutes later, Jenna pushed open the doors of Green Pine Veterinary Clinic, the bell jingling softly as she carried the exhausted dog inside. The receptionist, Laura, looked up from her desk, her eyes widening as she saw the retriever in Jenna's arms. "What happened?" "Found him on the freeway. He's injured, and I don't know if he belongs to someone." Laura nodded, immediately signaling a veterinarian to come forward. Dr. Mark Calloway emerged from the back office, wiping his hands with a towel. He was a seasoned vet, known for his calm demeanor and deep compassion for animals. The moment his eyes landed on the retriever, something shifted in his expression. "Let's take a look," he said, leading Jenna to an examination table. As he gently ran his hands over the dog's thin frame, checking for wounds, he murmured, "He's been through a lot, but he's strong." Then he reached for the microchip scanner. "Let's see if he has an owner." Jenna watched anxiously as he passed the scanner over the dog's shoulder. A beep sounded. Dr. Calloway's brow furrowed as the microchip number popped up on the screen. He typed it into the database. A moment later, his entire face paled. The room went silent. Laura, standing behind him, froze, her clipboard clutched tightly in her hands. Jenna's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" Dr. Calloway slowly turned the screen toward her. On the monitor was the dog's name, Max. He had an owner. But below that, something unbelievable was written in the records. Status: DECLARED 2 years ago. Jenna's mouth went dry. That can't be right. Dr. Calloway's hands were shaking as he ran another scan, double-checking the information. But the screen didn't change. According to official records, Max had been dead for 2 years. Jenna stared at the tired retriever, now resting on the exam table. He wasn't dead. He was right there, breathing, alive. But if Max had been declared deceased 2 years ago, where had he been all this time? A name that shouldn't exist. Dr. Mark Calloway felt his breath catch in his throat as he read the words again. Status: DECLARED 2 years ago. The air in the small veterinary exam room felt thick, as if reality had momentarily shifted, and none of them knew how to process what they were looking at. The dog on the table, the golden retriever with weary eyes and scars that told a story no one understood yet, was supposed to be dead. But here he was, alive, breathing, looking up at them as if he knew exactly what they had just discovered. Jenna, still standing near the doorway, felt a chill run down her spine. She swallowed hard and took a step closer, her voice barely above a whisper. That has to be a mistake, right? Mark's hands were steady as he typed rapidly on the keyboard, pulling up more details from the database. A name appeared. Ogolinier. Henry Lawson. Laura, the veterinary technician, let out a small gasp. No way, Henry Lawson. Jenna frowned. Who's that? Mark turned toward her, his eyes still wide with disbelief. Henry Lawson's house burned down in a wildfire 2 years ago. Everything was destroyed, including his dog. ***. Jenna's stomach twisted. But Max was declared deceased, Mark finished, because after the fire, there was no trace of him. They assumed he didn't survive. The room fell into silence. Jenna looked at Max again, who was resting his head against Mark's arm, his body still tense, but his eyes never leaving the people around him. He knew something. He had been somewhere. But where? And how had he ended up on the freeway, dodging cars and fighting for his life? A call no one expected. Mark reached for the phone. His fingers hovered over the keypad for a long moment before he finally dialed the number listed under Henry Lawson's file. Jenna watched as he pressed the receiver to his ear, his expression grave. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. Then, click. A voice, gruff and hesitant. Hello. Mark took a deep breath. Mr. Lawson, this is Dr. Mark Calloway. I'm a veterinarian at Green Pine Animal Clinic. There was a pause on the other end. Then Henry's voice, slow and cautious. What can I do for you, Doc? Mark glanced at Max, then exchanged a brief look with Jenna and Laura. Sir, I believe we have your dog. A deep silence settled over the call. Mark almost thought the line had gone dead. Then, a sharp intake of breath. Henry's voice, barely above a whisper. "Max is gone." Mark's grip on the phone tightened. "No, sir. He's here. He's alive." Another long pause, then a sound Mark couldn't quite place, something between a gasp and a muffled choke of disbelief. "You're sure?" Mark nodded, even though Henry couldn't see him. "I wouldn't be calling you if I wasn't." For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the veterinary clinic's overhead lights. Then Henry's voice broke completely. "I'm on my way." And then, the line went dead. Reunion or something more. 30 minutes later, the front door of the clinic burst open. Jenna turned at the sound, her heart hammering as a man stepped inside. He looked like he had aged 10 years in two. His hair, once likely dark, was streaked with silver. His eyes, sunken and tired, darted around the room anxiously, searching. His plaid shirt was worn. His boots were scuffed. And his hands were shaking. Henry Lawson. Jenna had never met him before, but something about the way he stood in that doorway made her stomach twist. This was a man who had lost everything. A man who had mourned for 2 years. And now he was about to come face to face with a ghost. Mark stepped forward. "Mr. Lawson." Henry barely acknowledged him. His eyes were locked on the dog sitting quietly on the floor near the examination table. "Max." For a moment, everything stood still. Then, Max lifted his head. His ears perked. His tail twitched. And then, with a single sharp bark, he launched himself across the room. "Max." Henry's voice cracked as the dog collided into him, nearly knocking him over. Jenna felt her throat tighten as she watched Henry fall to his knees, his arms wrapping tightly around his dog. The dog he had cried for, the dog he had buried in his heart, the dog who had somehow defied fate and returned home. Max pressed his face against Henry's chest, his entire body shaking. And Henry sobbed. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered over and over again, "I thought I lost you, buddy. I thought I lost you." Jenna turned away for a moment, blinking rapidly. Even Mark had to clear his throat. Laura wiped at her eyes with the back of her sleeve. It was the kind of moment people prayed for, but rarely got. But it wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Because as Henry buried his face in Max's fur, one thought kept echoing in Jenna's mind. Where had Max been? Because judging by the scars on his body and the fear in his eyes, this wasn't just a story of a lost dog finding his way home. It was a story of something bigger, something darker, something they weren't ready for yet. Jenna exhaled slowly. They had found Max. Now, they had to find the truth. The mystery deepens. The warmth of the moment had settled over the clinic like a fragile thread, one that none of them dared to break. Henry still knelt on the floor, his arms wrapped around Max, unwilling to let go. The golden retriever leaned into him, his tail wagging slowly, almost hesitantly, as if still uncertain whether this was real. Jenna had seen plenty of emotional reunions before, at shelters, in adoption centers, and on the news. But this was different. There was something heavy in the air, something left unsaid. Because Max had been gone for 2 years, and Henry had buried the idea of ever seeing him again. Yet, here they were, alive, together, and completely unaware of the secrets still hiding beneath the surface. The first clue, a scar that shouldn't be there. Dr. Mark Calloway cleared his throat, stepping forward carefully. "Henry, I know this is a lot to take in, but I need to run some final checks on Max, just to make sure he's in good health." Henry hesitated. He wasn't ready to let go yet. But he nodded. Yeah, of course. Do whatever you have to." Mark motioned for Laura, and together, they gently led Max back onto the exam table. Jenna watched as Mark began his examination, running his hands over Max's body, feeling along his ribs and limbs for any abnormalities. Then he stopped. His fingers had traced over a thin, raised scar near Max's right shoulder blade. Mark's brow furrowed as he leaned in closer. That's strange. Henry straightened. What is? Mark exhaled. This scar. It's surgical, but it wasn't in his records from before the fire. Henry's face darkened. Max never had surgery. Jenna's stomach twisted. If Max never had surgery, then where did the scar come from? Mark glanced at Laura. Can you get the ultrasound ready? Henry's grip tightened on the edge of the exam table. Mark, what's going on? The vet hesitated. I don't want to speculate, but if I didn't know better, I'd say something was implanted here. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Jenna felt cold. Implanted. The second clue. An unfamiliar object. The clinic's small ultrasound machine was wheeled in, and Laura quickly prepped the area. Mark spread a thin layer of gel over Max's shoulder and began moving the ultrasound probe in small, slow circles. The screen flickered to life. Jenna wasn't a veterinarian, but even she could tell that something was off. There, beneath the scar, was a small metallic object. Henry's breath caught. Mark narrowed his eyes. That isn't a microchip. Jenna took a step closer. Then what is it? Mark sat back, his jaw tight. I have no idea. Laura's voice was barely above a whisper. Should we remove it? Silence. Then Henry spoke, his voice low and firm. Yes. Max whined softly as Henry placed a reassuring hand on his head. Whatever it is, I want it out of him. Now. Mark nodded. We'll prep for a small procedure. It won't take long, but I need to sedate him, just to be safe. Henry's fingers curled into a fist at his side. Do whatever you need to. Jenna's mind was spinning. What the hell was inside Max? The extraction. An ominous discovery. An hour later, Jenna sat in the waiting area, bouncing her leg anxiously. Henry was pacing, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. He had barely spoken since they had taken Max to surgery. Laura finally emerged, pulling off her gloves. He's okay. He's waking up now. Henry let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. And the thing. Mark followed, holding a small plastic container in his hand. Inside was a thin metal tag, no larger than a coin. The edges were smooth and polished, and there was a series of numbers engraved into the surface. Henry took one look at it and froze. His entire face paled. Mark frowned. Henry. Jenna leaned in, squinting at the numbers. It just looks like a serial code. Henry slowly reached out, taking the container with trembling hands. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "This isn't just any number. This is a military tracking code." Jenna's heart dropped. Mark's eyes widened. Military. Henry nodded. I worked with these codes years ago. This isn't a pet microchip. It's a tag used for classified animal research programs. Jenna's chest tightened. What kind of programs? Henry's expression was grim. Ones the public isn't supposed to know about. The truth begins to unfold. Mark sat back, running a hand through his graying hair. Henry, are you saying Max was part of some government project? Henry exhaled sharply. I don't know, but someone put this in him. And whoever they are, they either lost track of him or... He hesitated. Jenna leaned forward. Or what? Henry looked up, his jaw tight. Or they want him back. The room went dead silent. A soft whimper broke the moment. Max, now groggy but awake, lifted his head from where he rested. His brown eyes flickered between them, as if sensing the weight of their conversation. Jenna swallowed hard. So what do we do now? Henry clenched his jaw. We find out where he's been. Mark nodded. And we figure out who put that tag in him. Jenna exhaled slowly. And if someone comes looking for him? Henry met her gaze, his voice strong and unwavering. Then we fight to keep him safe. Max let out a small, tired huff, his tail wagging once as if in agreement. The road ahead was still uncertain. But one thing was clear. This was only the beginning. The final truth and a new beginning. The next morning, Henry woke up before sunrise. He sat on his porch, a cup of coffee in his hands, watching the mist roll over the quiet stretch of land outside his small cabin. At his feet, Max lay curled up, his golden fur finally clean and brushed after the long, chaotic day before. He looked peaceful, breathing softly, his body finally at rest. But Henry knew the fight wasn't over yet. Because somewhere out there, someone had done this to Max, and Henry intended to find out who. The breakthrough. A call that changed everything. The next few days passed in a blur of research and dead ends. Mark had sent the metal tag to a contact of his at the local university, hoping they could trace its origins. Meanwhile, Jenna had been digging through old military research programs, looking for anything that matched the code on the implant. It wasn't until 5 days later that they finally got a lead. Henry's phone buzzed as he finished fixing breakfast. He picked it up, his heart skipping a beat when he saw the caller ID. Dr. Calloway. He answered immediately. What do you got? Mark's voice was tense. Henry, you need to get to the clinic. Now. Henry didn't ask questions. He grabbed his keys, called Max to his side, and drove straight to town. The unbelievable truth. When Henry walked into the Green Pine Animal Clinic, Mark and Jenna were already waiting for him. On the screen behind Mark's desk was a government database file, partially redacted, but the text that remained was enough to make Henry's blood run cold. Max hadn't just survived the fire. He had been taken. The file revealed that a classified animal research facility had been active in the region 2 years ago, studying canine survival instincts and advanced behavioral tracking. One of the subjects was a golden retriever named Max. Jenna stared at the screen, her hands balled into fists. They experimented on him. Mark exhaled. It looks that way, but what I don't understand is how he got away. This facility shut down a year ago. If Max was there then, Henry clenched his jaw. Then he must have escaped. Mark nodded grimly. And if he escaped, they might still be looking for him. Silence. Max, who had been lying at Henry's feet, let out a small whimper, as if he understood. Henry knelt beside him, running his fingers through his fur. You made it back to me, buddy. No one's taking you again. Jenna crossed her arms. So what do we do? Henry looked up, his eyes filled with determination. We make sure Max stays free. A life worth fighting for. Over the next few weeks, Henry took every precaution possible. Mark removed any remaining tracking elements from Max's old implant. Jenna contacted an animal rights lawyer, just in case anyone tried to claim Max. And Henry, he trained Max. Whatever Max had been through, he had survived. And Henry knew that meant he was stronger than anyone realized. Max wasn't just a pet anymore. He was a survivor, and Henry would never let anyone take him away again. One last visit. Months passed. Max had fully recovered. His once haunted eyes were now bright and full of life. Jenna still visited often, bringing treats, playing fetch with Max in the field behind Henry's cabin. One evening, as the sun set in streaks of orange and gold, Mark stopped by for one final checkup. After listening to Max's heartbeat and examining his coat, he nodded in approval. He's perfect. Henry smirked, scratching behind Max's ears. Always was. Jenna leaned against the porch railing. So, what now? Henry looked out at the land, the trees swaying in the cool breeze. He took a deep breath, feeling something he hadn't in a long time. Peace. Now. He glanced down at Max, whose tail wagged happily. Now we just live. Max gave a playful bark as if agreeing. And for the first time in 2 years, Henry finally felt whole again. The end, or just the beginning. Max's story was one of resilience, one of survival. But most of all, it was a story about the unbreakable bond between a man and his best friend. because no matter how far life pulls them apart, some souls always find their way back home. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.